Welcome back to part two of our conversation with Martin Spiller on AI in finance.
Say an FD in a growing business is able to get 30 or 40% of his time back because we've got all the bean counting being done by the AI. What's a good thing for that person to do with that time? Where are the areas that maybe growing business FDs aren't doing a lot now, that with your experience, you'd say they need to be doing more of these things, especially to move the growth needle if they can?
Yeah, sure. I can't find this article. It's disappeared, but there was an article a few years ago that CFOs are the CEO 1.5. And if you look at the FTSE 100, about 50 to 60% of the CEOs come from finance, and about 40% of them, or 35 to 40%, I think, in the last count, were accountants. And that's because at the large company level, it's all about finance, right? I think for SME, you should follow that bit which says if the CFO frees up his time from doing dull stuff, or the FC, then what they should do is get involved in the strategic side to give finance a strategic voice at the table for the business. So, as an example, if you're not counting the beans, you should be looking at what are the numbers saying, what are the trends. For example, we got this back to what I said before. We have this quest for turnover is vanity. Well, some other businesses could be more profitable, but smaller and a lot less risky but you need to know that. So to give you an example, in my own business, the last one I had was an IT support business. When we first analysed it, 5 of our top 20 customers were losing us money. One of them was losing us a considerable amount of money. So we got rid of a client. I'm not saying you don't do this without analysing it, because the client would never pay, and freed up a load of staff and resources to go and grow. So these are the sorts of things I think, and we didn't have AI in this work, but these are the sorts of things that I think you could get back from your time, actually getting a place at the table. So it won't replace the human, but it can support the human to do more of that. And one of the things is, if you program it right, and there are lots of different tools out there, but you can use the AI to help you spot the trends as well. Again, it won't do it perfectly, but it can help you, so that if you use that 40% of your time, you can get a strategic view. And finance is often seen as the place where people say no, but example for marketing, which I know is your background, Jonathan, if I should be coming to you and saying, we need to do more of this, Jonathan, this is working. Yeah, I found you the money by doing this. We can save the money there to invest there. That's a perfect use of time, and really, and it would make most SMEs a lot more competitive in the marketplaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen, both seen lots of businesses that the Pareto law applies, right? So 80% of their profit and revenue comes from the top 20%. A lot of the smaller businesses are probably losing their money, but very rarely does a finance director in a growing business have the time to do that kind of analysis and really get into the weeds with it, which then gives you the insights which you were talking about. So completely agree with that.
The really interesting thing, Jonathan, is I think that I'm no maths geek, because I got a B at GCSE maths. Everybody who says you're a chartered accountant and got a B at GCSE maths, because unless they had a pound sign in front of it, I wasn't interested in all those drawing a quadratic equation. I like quadratic equations, but all the kind of angles and things, sine, cosine, of no interest. But the really interesting thing about Pareto is they actually read around the numbers, and his numbers suggest it's 90-10, which is something I've often suspected. It's not even 80-20. And if you actually go into most businesses, you tend to find is there's one client who makes most of the money for the whole business. There's one person who really actually starts to boil down that this is really important now. And in these difficult, I think it's fair to say, and as we're recording this, we've just had the latest inflation numbers come out, and they're not great. The UK is way ahead. These are difficult times for SMEs and business in general. These are the sorts of things where it's a little bit of a dial which will make all the difference in not only thriving, but even potentially even surviving. And I'm not trying to be dour, because apart from my dour northern voice, I'm a relatively optimistic chap. But you need to be really competitive in this marketplace.
So everything that you said so far, Martin, has been what I would call operational efficiencies. So AI is going to be great and is great at find holes in things. It can do deep analysis work, which will take days or sometimes weeks for some analysts or finance teams to book it into their workflows or make it a priority for them. Do you think there's an opportunity for AI builders or people who have a finance background to develop their own set of tools? for SMEs?
I think, Danny, the reason I've focused on the operational efficiencies is the low hanging fruit. And at the moment, the tools that I've seen which try to do more than that don't work at an SME level, because AI requires, I think it's fair to say, is the inputs create the outputs, right? So the data it needs to learn just isn't there at SME level. So the answer to your question is probably yes. The only issue I have with it, Danny, is, so I've used some of the tools, for example, the claim to be able to do cash flow forecasting for SMEs in that, because Xero has followed a different path to, say, QuickBooks. QuickBooks is an all-in-one accounting package. Xero has gone down that kind of Salesforce ecosystem route where you buy, and I've used a couple of those forecasting tools, and I'm not going to name names and I'm not going to besmirch them, but they're just not able to deal with. For example, if a big client doesn't pay you, that wrecks your cash flow. It doesn't matter. And there's no way to work that out. So I think from my side, Danny, yes, there's a massive opportunity. And I think as we go down as AI, I mean, the performance of AI has got so ridiculous. In the year that I've been using it properly, its performance is radically different. But I think the reason I talk about those things, Danny, from a finance perspective, is because that's where the opportunity is right now. And I think if that frees up your time and you did that, the one thing I would say in terms of long-term value creation is what we're going to see when it comes to selling businesses or wanting to sell your businesses. Those businesses that have adopted AI are going to be seen as a lot more valuable than those that haven't, on the basis that the businesses that are using it are much more efficient, potentially more scalable. So what you're going to see is, and there is a resistance, I'm sure you guys have talked about this, by SMEs, but what you're going to see is those businesses that have used AI, you're going to see them sort of being much more valuable to the marketplace than those that aren't, because you'll be getting the most out of your employees. And at the moment, with everything that's going on, it's more and more expensive to put employees. So what you want to do is have fewer employees and make them as efficient as you possibly can. So I think the answer to your question, along with it, massive opportunity, but it's quite hard to do at SME level at the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've talked about before, Danny, is, from my point of view, I believe the opportunity in short term in AI is much more about scaling the business without scaling the headcount more than it is in reducing the headcount. So I know there's been some big headlines about Salesforce and other people taking thousands of people out of the business. There is some of that to do. But if you're a growing business, I think the opportunity is far more in your ability to scale quickly now, as Martin's talked about, integrate AI processes into your business so that your people are 2, 3, 4, 5 times as efficient. So you can now double revenue with your headcount only going up maybe 10%, as opposed to having to double your headcount to double revenue. I would agree with that.
I guess that with SMEs, I've worked with a couple, but I tend to be a little bit higher up from a size perspective. But something I've observed with SMEs is, especially with the automations, is enabling people to scale and get to a scale where they can do far more outreach. They can have far more effective communications with their customers. They can give them quicker and more succinct updates. So I'm guessing for SMEs, more from like an internal perspective, there's a requirement for being able to give the rest of the business an overview of performance and enabling the whole business to see what they see. Because working in SME or larger, often people just don't see the actual true state of the business. So I'm wondering, do you think AI is going to help improve that for SMEs or even to slightly bigger businesses? Or do you think actually that's just something that's going to be not big enough for AI to take on, or companies to develop that in the future?
Danny, the interesting thing for me is I think even in large companies, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because a lot of large companies created big teams in faraway places, like, for example, and I wouldn't name names, but there's groups in the Philippines where they've got huge finance teams because the people are cheaper. So the low-hanging fruit is there for large companies. And I've seen the ultimate is kind of an accountant's, like, you can say this, I'll say anyway, wet dream was a finance AI teams are all reporting to each other in this. Those things need to take place in the large companies. At the moment, we're still using a lot of human capacity. For SMEs, the benefit is that, as we've just talked about, you're freeing up a bit of time to do the strategic stuff that isn't getting done. For large companies, the finance teams still need to be supplemented, and it will allow faster overviews of more complicated businesses. But at the moment, AI is still not adopted at the level it could be. I mean, I've seen one, like I said, this organogram of each financial controller talking to a finance director, talking to a CFO, and they're all AI agentic examining. But it isn't there even for as far as I'm aware, and I've worked with a few large companies on projects, even the largest companies still use a lot of people, often in far-flung locations where they're cheap. There's a lot of work to be done. So actually for finance, it might be different in other areas. It probably is in marketing. But for finance, the starter for 10 is being able to do some of the basic processing without people being involved, so you can work more efficiently. From there, the benefit of that would be giving you time to then look at things that are strategic, for which then AI will obviously get better and better. And the more if you have your big company siloed version of a particular tool, the more data you feed it, the more accurate it gets.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, Martin, isn't it? I think Danny and I have talked about a lot. The two big impediments to AI rollout now we're seeing up and down the company size scale. One is the quality of your data, and the second one is your people and whether they're aware or trained to experiment with AI. And that data question's interesting because the one place where you are going to get accurate data, I think, is in the finance function. People's bank account, bank reconciliations, finance data tends to be very accurate, even if their CRM's a mess and their product data is not great, their finance data. So the opportunity is there in finance, I think, because the data quality is good up and down the size of business. It's an opportunity in finance that maybe isn't yet elsewhere in some businesses.
And there'll be some really niche tools, Jonathan. One of the areas that I'm quite excited about is things like due diligence. If you were taking over another company,
yeah,
AI will allow you to look at, rather than just looking at samples of data, we could take the whole lot and dump it in and see what it spots by programming correctly. So I think, Danny, there'll be niches where that applies, large and small, like due diligence, like interrogations, like when there's investigations where things have gone wrong, you'll be able to interrogate in rapid form. As you mentioned, things that would probably take months rather than minutes or hours. And I think that's the really exciting bit. But I still think for large and small alike in this area, it's almost a case of they've got so much data that AI's first step is to automate things that are easy and to help people get access to that data. Because some businesses almost have too much that they can't actually make sense of what's going on. And I guess if we take a really big company, Louis Vuitton is a great example because they run a decentralized structure. They've got 6 or 7 themes, 75 houses, they call them. There's a lot of data in there, Danny, to consolidate and also understand what's actually happening. And I think, you can see it with some of the companies like the Zaras of this world in fashion. This is where the harnessing will come from. And then it will be, the best bit about this is, from an AI perspective, it democratizes it for large and small alike, doesn't it?
Does.
That's what Shein did. They ran AI at such a scale that they really understood the quality control, demand, logistic, and they openly speak around how they had accelerated above others and used different models to get there. So I think that if the big companies can do it, like you said earlier, Martin, there's going to be opportunities for big and small companies to like leverage the same tech, or even if it's build a slightly different version of it on open source, then there's a huge amounts of opportunity in there.
But Shein, I never know how to say it, Danny. I'll go with your Shein. It sounds better than my Shein. Shein gives a great example of AI, how you have to be careful with that image that it created of that person. I can't remember who it was, but there's that. So it's a great example, even then, within the finance function of the day. You can make massive gains, but you still, at the moment, need human interventions just to make sure that you're not making big mistakes. I think Shein's a great example, and they are obviously a powerhouse to be reckoned with, right? They've made a massive difference in a lot of markets where, I don't know if the numbers have just been out for Boohoo, they're struggling and all of this stuff, and they were the ones that destroyed the top shops in this world. So I think it's really interesting, but you have to be careful. It gives a great illustration of the power, but also not the dark side necessarily, because I don't think it was malevolent, but you just have to be careful even with the most powerful tools, right? I guess the thing that I've started to realize is with great power comes great responsibility, right? You need to be careful.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions, please reach out via the show notes below. You can also subscribe to our supporting newsletter released with every podcast. Go to aimoment.co.uk and hit subscribe. We share more important links, run-throughs of the tools mentioned in the podcast, and more. See you next time.